Welcome to the Butter Notes podcast with three guys who have no business listening to music, much less talking about it. We're going to talk about the big 5 prog records today, at least as decided by progarchives.com and their weird algorithms and genre sorting and yada yada yada. So I figure we'll do it chronologically. Let's get started here with Court of the Crimson King, 1969.
So are these... So if you go to the top prog albums on progarchives.com, these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5?
Yep.
I think so, yeah.
Now, we're doing it chronologically rather than by their order. I think their order is Close to the Edge, number 1, Selling England, number 2, Court of the Crimson King, number...
I'm looking at it, yeah. It's Yes, Genesis, Pink Floyd, King Crimson, Tull are the top 5.
I wish you were here, number 3 out of that 5. I can't fucking believe that.
It's wild, man. Yeah. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But yeah, so we're going to do this chronologically, and might as well just launch in here with Court of the Crimson King. 1969. And
the year of our Lord. 1969.
52 years old this album is now.
Yeah. 52 years old, and for Robert Fripp still killing it consistently. I think all of us are going to probably go see him in the fall.
Oh, yeah.
The record that I think is like almost universally considered to be the first... I can't handle talking about this while watching you sniff whiskey. This is too much. How did my life turn into this?
That's going to get us canceled for you.
Why don't you boys get some Glencairn glasses? Pick up a bottle, and we'll do this every Friday.
Okay.
Moving on.
Just the thought about talking about In the Court of the Crimson King being the first progressive rock album, and then I see James sniffing some whiskey out of a snifter. I just... I realize that I am truly I'm just a fucking dork. Had to accept it in that moment.
I'll never be as cool as that.
No, the James sniffing the whiskey was a component in me being a dork, not in opposition to me being a dork.
You gotta nose the fucking shit. You're gonna spend $50 on the bottle of whiskey. You don't want to know what it smells like.
Yeah, you have
coffee, man. It's the same thing. Yeah.
Wait, what are you drinking? Glenfiddich?
No, I'm not. I'm drinking. This is Four Roses Single Barrel.
Oh, I stand corrected.
Yeah,
you would never touch Glenfiddich?
No, I like Glenfiddich. It's not my favorite single malt, but
Four Roses Single Barrel.
Yeah, it's like a high rye bourbon. It's good.
All right, so where do you come in on the thesis that In the Court of the Crimson King is the first progressive rock record of all time?
I think that's pretty reasonable. I can't really... I thought about this the other day. I can't think of anything else that really falls into that category. Like, there are people who would say Freak Out, but I don't really think Freak Out's a prog album. It's like twisted doo-wop.
Yeah, Freak Out is like proto-crap rock. At least the longer tracks are. And the rest of it I would call, twisted doo-wop. If that was a genre, that would be what Freak Out is.
When did the self-titled Jethro Tull come out?
That is a blues rock album. But that came out 68, I'm pretty sure. This was.
And what about the debut Yes album?
Debut Yes album was 69 too. The debut Yes album is a progressive rock album.
Yeah, the debut Tull album is that. I mean, the first track on that is Led Zeppelin through and through. Yeah. Which is what I was going to ask. I mean, what do we think about Zeppelin and the Beatles? How do they figure into this picture?
They don't, for my money.
They absolutely do. Well, the Beatles absolutely do.
The first two Zeppelin albums, definitely not.
Oh, no. I'm thinking like Houses of the Holy or something like that.
House of the Holy didn't come out till, what, 75? Yeah. 73 or 70. I think 73.
I mean, it's later, but yeah. I'm just wondering if Zeppelin... Because, I mean, the Zeppelin and Beatles influences are all over these 5 records. Well, mostly the 4 not named Wish You Were Here. Wish You Were Here is a little bit different, I think, in a different ballpark than the other 4. But the Zeppelin and Beatles... At least because they were all operating around the same times. They're playing on a lot of the similar themes. I think.
Beatles is doing some kind of proto-prog stuff with the more psychedelic records, like some of the stuff on White Album, a lot of the stuff on Sgt. Pepper's,
and Revolver too.
And Revolver.
Led Zeppelin played an enormously large role from day one of Led Zeppelin's existence in the cultivation of like rock excess and rock being excessive and uninhibited. Sure. And that's enormously important in the development of prog rock. So stylistically, the music is not really, at least the early stuff definitely is not progressive rock music. It's like hard rock, like proto heavy metal, blues rock. But Led Zeppelin were always just like balls to the wall, gigantic jams, 25-minute drum solos, uninhibited, excessive music, more so than rock music had been pre-Led Zeppelin. And that's really important for progressive rock, even if the aesthetic of the music is a little bit different. So I think they played for that reason.
Yeah,
I think
definitely.
I think the weird sort of experimental side of the Beatles as well. We can kind of put that in there, but
yes,
yeah, I wonder if maybe James, what you're thinking is like this idea that progressive music is at least like when we're talking about the stuff at the tail end of the 60s and into the 70s as being a group of bands or like a genre of its own that includes these sorts of bands. I know that some people talk about progressive rock in that way. When people say, "Oh, I listen to progressive rock," they're thinking of Jethro, Tull, Camel, Van der Graaf Generator, and so on. But progressive, I think we've talked about this before, being a sort of meta genre, as like pushing the bounds of a particular genre. And in that case, Beatles and Led Zeppelin are both rock and roll, and they both managed to do that beyond, Buddy Holly and the stuff in the 50s. So I don't know that they're exactly progressive rock, but I think they deserve a mention here. And they're closer to it than tons of other music for sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I was thinking it's good you brought up the genre philosophy distinction there, because they do sort of get used interchangeably, because progressive rock can on the one hand mean symphonic prog bands, capital P prog bands from the early 70s, and it can also mean rock bands that applied a certain type of unlimited depth to their music in terms of the creative process as more of a philosophy in the composition. So in that context, I think the Beatles and Led Zeppelin could definitely fall into the category, but like we all just agreed, I don't think the early stuff, at least in this time period, would qualify as capital P prog.
No, because then we'd be talking about Led Zeppelin 4, as one of these 5 albums or something like that.
Right, sure.
Yeah.
The Beatles are unbelievably just inescapably influential on any music that existed after them. Like literally 100% of music that existed after the Beatles is in some way influenced, either like a negative or a positive influence, either a reaction against or influenced by the Beatles. They were like the most influential band of all time. So it goes without saying.
John Cage.
It goes without saying that the Beatles are influential on progressive rock.
Yeah.
Also, I think
I definitely agree.
Especially in the Court of the Crimson King, it's important to note that jazz was doing crazy stuff in the late 60s. Like Coltrane was going nuts before he died in 67.
Miles too.
Miles was going crazy with it. The fusion, free jazz was popping off in the U.S. and in
Bitches
Europe.
Brew came out in 16. No, Bitches Brew wouldn't come out for another year actually. Bitches Brew came out in 1970.
But In a Silent Way came out in like Filet Steak Kilimanjaro and stuff like that is also not quite as nuts as In a Silent Way and Bitches Brew, but definitely doing some crazy stuff. And that's what was going on in jazz music around this time, is very much present on in the Court of the Crimson King, especially on Moonchild and on Schizoid Man.
Yeah. Schizoid Man for sure. The horns. Ian McDonald, man, is all over this record, and like his jazz influence. I made sure to put in my notes that aside from rock, the most prevalent genre that shines through in this record, I think, is jazz. At least noticeably to me when I was listening to it. Ian McDonald's doing some really interesting stuff intermixed with the guitars.
Yeah, and there's obviously a strong classical element too. which I think is going to shine through more on the Genesis and the Yes albums, but it's there on Court of the Crimson King too.
Particularly Epitaph and the title track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All 5 of these tracks, I think one thing that makes In the Court of the Crimson King a particularly like legendary record is that it's 5 just like absolutely rock solid tracks that are all very different. They're all very, very different. Almost like a different genre for each song. Arguably Epitaph and In the Court of the Crimson, or in the title track, are both like in the more symphonic classical side, but we get jazz fusion, jazz rock with Schizoid Man. We get folk, like kind of psychedelic folk with I Talk to the Wind, and then we get free improvisation with Moonchild.
Such a great track.
Yeah,
they're doing everything here.
Yeah, they really are. And I Talk to the Wind is so different from everything else in particular. I Talk to the Wind has a pop element to it almost. It's a very approachable melody. It's very pleasant sounding.
It's got the flute in it, right?
Yeah. The flute in it. It almost sounds like a standard from the 30s or 40s. But it's got that psychedelic element to it. It's so interesting.
Yeah, it has that like kind of twee 60s sunshine pop element to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Peter Sinfeld's lyrics, fantastic on all of these songs. Some of the best lyrics in progressive rock. Yeah, Epitaph. And also, the political lyrics on Epitaph, the sort of like anti-war
Schizoid
Man, like pretty political lyrics on this album, more so than what typically you see in progressive rock music. I mean, there's plenty of like political progressive rock music, but it's not typically that way. Yet, like this early standard of the genre is pretty political, at least relatively.
They were very forward with it too. I mean, the line "Innocence raped with napalm fire" from Schizoid Man, they're not holding anything back. There's no subtlety there.
Yeah. And I mean, protest music is so like inextricably entwined with rock music of the 60s that even like this kind of more heady stuff that starts with King Crimson doesn't like totally break off from that.
Well, he managed to mix. I'm just thinking like the first couple lines of Schizoid Man. What is it? Cat's foot, iron claw. I mean, they mix this kind of like obscure symbolic language with like, as you point out, this really straightforward cutting language, which I find that really interesting.
Yeah, and then like the lyrics on the title track, which is like this medieval fantasia, and the lyrics on Moonchild are similarly that way. That in juxtaposition with the political lyrics, and then like the kind of like sunshiny lyrics of I Talk to the Wind, it shouldn't even really work. It should be like disjointed on paper, but it's not. Like it's so organic the way that these 5 tracks flow and interact with each other.
Yeah,
without a doubt. Yeah. So
I was thinking about this, and I was going to ask you, James, since you've just had some experience recording. And I'm wondering if this was a choice made by Fripp and the gang, or if it was a limitation due to the technology they had at the time, or a mixture of both, or something else. But this album, in comparison to some of the later Crimson stuff, I'm thinking of Lark's Tongue, and then the 80s stuff like Discipline and whatever. This album is, I guess the way to describe it is really loud, and there's less dynamics to it than I think compared to some of the later stuff. Now I know Steven Wilson has done a remix of this album, and I know he's like really big on turning down the sound of because a lot of the
letting the dynamic range shine.
It's getting a much like cleaner. Well, that's a philosophical thing. I think a lot of people might disagree or take exception to me saying that, but. Yeah, I don't know. And maybe you don't have the same observation, but I thought this album was. I've always thought this album was kind of gritty, rough. I think there's a good bit of distortion, especially on Greg Lake's vocals.
And the guitar.
And the guitar, and I always thought the album was just kind of loud, especially with the saxophone and so on.
I didn't have that same observation. If anything, I noticed a lot of the dynamic range coming through, especially on like Moonchild. There's a few minutes where it's
Moonchild is insanely quiet.
Audible.
Moonchild is insanely quiet.
That's
like
fair.
there are parts of Moonchild where you have to crank your speaker like to max to even hear anything. I mean, they are playing throughout the whole song.
That being that being said, I mean, Schizoid Man is pretty much balls to the wall from start to finish. Well, after the few seconds of it's like a whistle, I think, in the beginning of Schizoid Man, in the fade in. But after that point, it is pretty balls to the wall in terms of the amplitude of the mix. So, yeah, I mean, there are points where it's very loud.
Yeah, it's just the jazzier parts or something. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why I had that impression, but that just stuck out to me when I was listening to it. I thought it was louder than some of the other albums I'd listened to.
I don't think that's off base.
Well, no, I don't think so either. I mean, I think, let's see here, because Genesis dynamics are crazy. I'm just thinking about comparing this to the other four we're talking about today. There are moments on Selling England by the Pound where the volume damn near drops out.
Yeah.
Like at the end of Dancing with the Moonlit Night, the dynamics are very low.
The beginning of Cinema Show.
I was going to say parts of Cinema Show.
Like the first half of Cinema Show.
Close to the Edge, especially.
Close to the Edge has a pretty intense dynamic range.
Yeah.
A pretty wide dynamic range. So does Wish You Were Here, and so does Thick as a Brick.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's not that it has no dynamics at all. I just thought, it was just more of a relative observation compared to. I was listening to Discipline, and Elephant Talk starts up, and I had to crank up my speakers to hear it a little better to get a cleaner sound, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. There are a lot of layers in. I mean, there's always a lot of layers in Crimson's music, but on this album, there's a lot of layers, and there's that distortion slapped on top of the vocals, and maybe it's drowning out. And maybe my speakers are just bad, so that's also a possibility.
Well, relative to Lark's Tongues and Aspic, I mean, nothing has a dynamic range.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, there are definitely parts that are very loud. I mean, there's so much of that psychedelic rock element to Court of the Crimson King. I'm thinking especially about Schizoid Man here. I'm sure they were. I don't know what kind of gear they were using, but it's something like a 100-watt full stack guitar amplifier that they're just diming out.
Yeah, they're wanting to be noisy on Schizoid Man. Like it's almost proto noise rock, to be honest. Like I associated almost even more with that style of like avant progressive or like brutal prog or noise rock. It's like almost more that than I would call it jazz rock. It's so loud, like it's but like intentionally so. I don't think the whole album is quite that way.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering if that were if you'd share the observations. Do we think it was just a limitation of the technology, or it seems like everything Robert Fripp does is intentional. I don't know. I was just watching a bunch of his interviews recently, and the man just seemed to have. I mean, he wasn't. From what I can understand, he wasn't like domineering. He wasn't a tyrant in King Crimson. I think he believed that would obstruct the music, especially because he mentioned that they're like a much better live band than they are a recording band. But he had such a masterful control over everything and I don't know. Yeah, I could just see in Crimson. Even some of the weirder avant-garde stuff that might, slap you side of the face and you come out of nowhere, you can see is very deliberate and intentional, which I think it's just remarkable.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. There's a great Bruford line about talking about the difference between playing in Yes and versus Crimson.
Yeah, I have that in here.
Yeah. So he says in Yes we would get in long arguments about whether or not to harmonize with the F sharp or the G. In King Crimson, you were just sort of supposed to know.
Yeah.
And I think that just speaks to the chemistry a little bit in Crimson's music.
Yeah, I have in 3 different places here. Of course, we'll talk about Bruford leaving in a bit, I suppose. But I think Anderson, John Anderson, and Bill Bruford, and then Fripp has also said in other interviews that, and I'll use the Bruford quote, he's like, "Wow, I'd found King Crimson so attractive because they are way more open. Surprise us, go ahead, let's improvise. Terrific." So there's just like a almost spiritual like understanding between the members, just like playing off each other. And I mean that clip that you sent us, Waiting Man, with like Baloo comes out and he and Bruford, he just jumps into Bruford's percussive set, and it just it's a clean transition into that. And they just had I think that's what's interesting about Robert Fripp is his eye for talent and knowing I don't know. It's not like you just like picking off really good musicians. Like, oh, they're good players. Let's put them in. Like, he had an eye towards chemistry, knowing that was really important in composing the music.
Yeah, and I mean, well, this is a fundamental difference between jazz and classical music as well. Jazz is hugely improvisatory, whereas classical music is more or less the simple performance of compositions that are written out to be played exactly how they will eventually be played.
Yeah, and
so it's not surprising. It's not surprising to see those elements in.
Yeah, and King Crimson is more firmly rooted in the like tradition of improvisation, or the improvisatory tradition of jazz, more than any other like major progressive rock band.
Yep.
Even in like the contemporary era, specifically in.
I think that's right. Yeah.
They were
specifically in their I mean a lot on the albums too. There's a lot of improvs on the albums, including on this one with Moonchild, which is a totally free improv. But just going into their live set, like their live shows, which I mean they're basically an exclusively live band at this point, and Fripp kind of considers them to be better as a live band, and long extended improv is a huge part of their live set ever since day one. And they're like, in that sense, they are like definitely the jazziest, even when they're not playing like jazz rock, which like even like in the 80s stuff, they're still highly jazzy in the sense that there's a lot of improv happening, more than any other of the major progressive rock bands.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean it's funny, they were just a blisteringly tight band too. Like even when this first album came out, you got to think of that bridge in Schizoid Man, where they're all playing that same line all in unison with the snare behind it, and there's a point. There's a
masterpiece.
It's amazing. Yeah. And there's a point in Bruford's autobiography. I don't know if you guys have read that, but he talks about he went and saw King Crimson in his first iteration when this album came out, and they played Schizoid Man, and he's like, and they got to this part of the song where they just played this line together over and over again that was so tight, and you know he's talking about the bridge, and it always gets me.
Yeah, lineup is really short-lived lineup on this album. Greg Lake, obviously, who would go on to do great things with Keith Emerson and Carl Palmer. Michael Giles on drums. Does Giles play drums on In the Wake of Poseidon? Or is it someone else? I'm looking it up.
I don't remember.
I mean, the band had like completely dissolved already by the time that album came out. He plays drums on some of it. The lineup on In the Wake of Poseidon is kind of scattershot. And then Ian McDonald, who plays about 1,000 instruments on here. I did want to mention, talking about technology, this is definitely like one of the first and still one of the most iconic uses of the Mellotron on Epitaph.
Oh God, yeah.
And the beginning of the title track.
Yeah, the title track too.
Yeah. The Mellotron being like a pretty like complicated and uniquely sort of difficult piece of analog instrumentation that is used to really great effect on this album.
Difficult mostly in the sense that it's unreliable.
Yeah, like the John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin would always tell stories about how like the tape would like almost inevitably get tangled in the middle of sets.
Yep.
And like basically when that happened, there was like almost no way to fix it.
Yeah. What are you gonna do? Yeah, that's an amazing piece of gear though, man. They're so cool. I've never seen one.
Yeah, you cannot replicate that digitally.
No, you really can't. I've never seen one in person.
Yeah.
I would love to eventually get to just fuck around with one for a couple of minutes.
But I think I don't know, like this album has to be the most iconic recordings of that instrument ever. I can't think of anything else.
This stuff,
like
some
when
of
you
Tony
think of
Banks'
Mellotron,
stuff,
you think of this.
Some of Tony Banks
and some
stuff
Zeppelin
too.
stuff, to be honest.
Yeah,
like No Quarter.
Yeah, No Quarter.
But if I had to, like, I don't know, for anyone who knows what a Mellotron is, if you bring up that instrument, this is going to be the first album they think of.
Yeah, I would immediately think of Epitaph.
I would venture to say.
Yeah, I would immediately think of Epitaph.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's move on to number 2. So the next album to come out chronologically was Thick as a Brick by Tull. Came out in 72, almost 3 years later.
Yeah. Some space in there, yeah.
Yeah. Especially because so much amazing shit had been coming out immediately following Court of the Crimson King. But
yeah, like 68 through 75 is like one of the most fertile times of
Yeah.
It's a golden age.
At least for rock music of all time.
Yeah.
It's a golden age.
I have like an immediate, possibly hot take about Thick as a Brick.
Okay.
It might not be that hot. You guys will actually probably agree. But there's this sort of like mythos surrounding Thick as a Brick that it was like created as a joke, and that like Ian Anderson wasn't being serious about it, and that it was like created as a parody of progressive rock, and that like it was basically a joke of an album that Ian Anderson like did not really intend to even like be taken seriously, and I do not believe that. True. I do not believe that. No, but it's a real kind of mythos that surrounds the album.
Well,
I don't believe it at all.
So here, I just listened to an interview with Ian Anderson on this a few days ago, actually. So they put out Aqualung in 71, and everyone thought, oh, this is a concept album. And Ian Anderson and the rest of Tull, they're going, this isn't a concept album, this is a collection of songs. I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
It's a concept album. At least side 2 is.
They say it's not, specifically.
All the songs on side 2 are about the same topic. It's like almost the definition of a concept album.
Right, but
it touches
anyway,
on. It's more.
It's not a rock opera. It's not a rock opera, but it is a conceptual album.
Sure.
Fair.
But so Ian Anderson takes that and says, we're going to sort of cut up the genre in the sense of something like Monty Python. Like he went about it in a way that was sincere, obviously. I mean, that music is extremely sincere, but the approach was somewhat satirical, I think, of the excesses of the concept album and of the audience for thinking that they were doing concept albums, and of the critics who were telling everyone that they were making concept albums. So there is that element to it. I don't think the entire thing is a joke. Like I said,
I don't even think the album is funny at all. I don't really detect any humor at all in the album. Like I never have.
It's subtle.
You have to read like the newspaper shit.
Yeah.
All the little bits on the cover of the album. That's where they really went in deep and had fun with the humor element.
I guess, but I don't know. I think that it was like a little bit of a. I think it was a little bit of sort of like a. I think he was putting on some airs. I think he might have felt, and this is speculation that is unfalsifiable, but I think he might have felt just like sort of self-conscious about writing music like that and put on some airs about it. Because I don't really detect much comedy at all in the album. It's not like a deadly serious album, but I don't really detect anything funny about the album at all. It seems like just like a seriously composed and performed like piece of like pretty complicated like art rock music, and I always felt that way about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's not I don't know. So like I look at some of the humor on like Frank Zappa's records, and it's like immediately like I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that dude's telling a joke there or something like that. And not in every case. I mean, Frank's very witty as well, and it's not obvious that what he's trying to say. You have to think about it for a while. So if it weren't for Ian Anderson saying, yeah, it's a bit of a satire of the genre, or something like that, I can see where you're coming from. But I always thought it was more of just it's like a more abstract sense of making. It's not. I don't know. He's not ham-fisting the jokes in there like, oh, this genre is bombastic. He's letting. I think he. I guess I'm trying. He's letting the music play itself out, and that be the parody of it, or something like that. I don't know how to describe it. He just writes this kind of banal story, and then just pumps it up to be this magnificent tale of heroic tale of this young boy writing a poem, or something like that, and then stretching it out for 40 minutes in this grand journey or something like that across the music. Or...
Well, the concept, unless I'm wrong, the concept is that the lyrics of the album are the poem written by the boy. So the lyrics of the album are not like, and if they're intended this way, it's not comprehensible this way. The lyrics of the album are not like a story about the boy. The idea is that like the lyrics are the poem written by the boy, right?
Right.
I think it's right. He wrote Ian Anderson. I think released in a solo project a sequel to Thick as a Brick, and I think it told the story of Bostock as he grew up. But I think I don't think the original one was the story. I think the newspaper clippings and such were supposed to help with that.
Yeah, so it's just like this weird sort of like kind of artifice that was constructed around the album, because like the lyrics are just lyrics, and a lot of them are good and like pretty insightful, and like and kind of more down to earth than a lot of prog rock lyrics are. And then there's like this kind of like comedic artifice that is surrounded around the album with the packaging and with the publicity and what he said about it in interviews. And I don't know why he did that. I mean, I speculated about it before, but I can't prove that. I don't know why he decided to do that. But I don't think it comes across in the music.
Maybe it was I don't know this. I'm speculating here, but maybe it's I don't know, it's something that at the time people writing this kind of music would see it as a signal that, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like it's a joke that maybe only people who would, compose or write such music would get immediately, or something like that.
I do think it is a matter of record that Ian Anderson was like somewhat put off by the aesthetic that was developing around progressive rock and the pomposity of it. Like that's like, I think, a matter of record that he felt that way. Yeah. And so I think that like, yeah, I don't think it's like too much of a stretch to say that he like sort of perceived that in the music he wrote here and like kind of wanted to sort of like add some irony on top of it, because he might have felt self-conscious about it.
I think this is easily Tull's most technical record. I don't think anything else compares to it, and I think it's a little strange in the context of the rest of the discography, that it's not as, the sound is much cleaner. I think that the production of this album is, in my opinion, of the five, is I think the one I enjoyed the most. It's very crisp, very clear. All the instruments are layered really well and balanced in the mix, I think. But it's not as raw as some of the stuff like Songs from the Woods or even some of his later stuff. It is much more technical and on par with something like Close to the Edge, I think.
Yeah, the blues from the early stuff is pretty much gone. Not 100% gone. Blues exists in like almost all rock music, but it's mostly gone here. There is still a lot of folk. But it's not like the kind of sort of pastoral kind of raw folk that you mentioned that he would do later on Songs of the Wood, which I love. I love that period of Tull. It's a difficult album to sort of. It's a progressive rock album undoubtedly, but it's a difficult one to categorize genre-wise, like within subgenres of progressive rock. I wouldn't really call it prog folk. There is folk happening. But I don't think folk is the predominant mode of Thick as a Brick. And I wouldn't really call it symphonic either.
Symphonic, yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of both. I mean, there's such a huge classical element to this album with all the little motifs that come and go throughout the album and that are referenced as it goes on. So there's a very tightly composed portion of this album, but it definitely retains a lot of the folk element too.
Yeah.
Especially the way it begins, it's just Ian Anderson and a guitar line, an acoustic guitar line to get everything going.
Great builds. One of the best builds. One of the best first 5 minutes of any rock album ever made.
Oh, dude! When they play, when the organ and the guitar bends come in together,
beautiful. Yeah,
it's fucking amazing, man.
It's like just one of the. It's not really a crescendo because it's more of like kind of like a bolero style thing where like you're getting like gradual like layers added on top.
Right. Yep.
Just beautiful first 5 minutes. Again, I just repeating myself, of any rock album ever.
My favorite point in Thick as a Brick is about 15 minutes into side A. There's this organ melody that comes in.
I know exactly.
I don't know how to reference it without just doing it, but I know you guys know what I'm talking about. It's very delicate and very major. It's in the Mixolydian mode, so it's got this big epic sound to it. And they're going back and forth between the 4 and the 5, and it's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
It makes me grin ear to ear every time I hear it.
Yeah, and what you said, James, I think is right, that I guess I would have to sort of call this symphonic if I had to call it anything, because it is very through composed, and we're having like motifs and movements and recurring themes and things like that. And that's really like what a symphony is. And so I would kind of have to call it symphonic if I had to call it anything other than just progressive rock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hadn't listened to this in a very long time. Probably not for a few years. And I've listened to it 3 or 4 times since we decided to do this episode. I just forgot how perfect it is.
Do you feel like you like it more now than you did back in the day?
Definitely, yeah. Oh, absolutely, yeah. In terms of these 5 albums, this is probably the one I had the least familiarity with, even though I've heard it, a dozen times previously.
Yeah.
This
but
one
it was fun bringing it back up.
This one tangles with Close to the Edge for my favorite of the 5, I would say.
I think I had this at number 4.
Let's talk about the ranking at the end.
Top 5. Yeah, we'll save that.
Yeah.
Anything else we want to say about Tull here?
Ian Anderson's a genius.
He really is.
I mean, the dude's like, he's got Martin Barr. It's like Martin Barr's like freaking great guitarist, man. But Ian Anderson, we're talking about someone who's domineering and tyrannical over the music, but like in a good way. That's Ian Anderson, man, and he's got as much control, if not more, over Jethro Tull than what Fripp was doing with Crimson too. It's just so well placed and structured, and even in the folksy stuff, there's just it's a touch of genius in everything he does. I fucking love
Have you ever listened to him in an interview?
I haven't, no.
Ian Anderson, he's extremely well spoken.
Yeah, he's a genius.
Yeah, he's a
smart
very
guy.
very sharp guy.
Well, I think
he's a very sharp guy.
Another thing that makes me like him is I know Michael Ackerfeld like respects the hell out of Ian Anderson, and I think that speaks a lot too as well. Because I mean Ian Anderson influences Opeth in a lot of ways too, which I hear the influence, especially on the later stuff, like on Sorceress
on the
and
newer stuff.
Yeah. Will of the Wisp is just a straight up Tull.
It is.
Ackerfeld's admitted he's like, I ripped off Ian
Tull.
Anderson so many times. Yeah.
Man, it's funny too because Ian Anderson is a zany bastard on stage too. If you watch old clips of them performing live, the dude is dancing around like
he's the bard, man.
Like a jester, man.
Yeah.
And he's so good at it while also maintaining this kind of sophistication to the music. It's so cool.
Great drumming on Thick as a Brick. Really great guitar drum solo that opens up side 2. I always forget the name of the drummer, Barrymore Barlow. And no one has ever even heard of this guy, and he plays on like a huge amount of the Tull discography. The first album he was on was
drum
this
solo on side 2 of Thick as a Brick too.
Yeah, at the beginning. Great drumming on Thick as a Brick. No one has ever heard of this guy for some reason, Barlow, who played on so many Tull albums. Like, would you have known that guy's name?
No.
Yeah, definitely has to be one of the most underrated drummers of 70s rock. Great drumming on this album.
I would only have been able to name Ian Anderson and Martin.
Yeah. The rest of the Tull lineup was such a revolving door throughout their existence, other than the two of them. Yeah, super underrated drummer, Barrymore Barlow. Good shit.
I don't know what to say with this album. It's I think it's in a really unique place in Tull's discography. I think it's maybe the most unique if not only because it's much longer and maybe more ambitious than some of the other music. I mean, it's not a knock on it. I don't even know if it's my favorite Tull record, but yeah, it's just it's so different than everything else. And I think I've mentioned this before, that I really appreciate when a musician can change the mold of what they're doing, start to play in a different genre or subgenre, and then just say, okay, I'm really good at this too. See that with like Steven Wilson and The Raven and Hand Cannot Erase, and then he starts playing pop music and stuff, so he can just kind of that's something I really appreciate about Ian Anderson.
Yeah, super versatile guy. The Tull's discography is like always super rewarding. Not every single album in there is really like. Most of them are good, some of them are not good, but pretty much the majority of them are at least good and definitely interesting how he evolved musically over the decades.
Yeah.
I play the Jethro Tull Christmas every year on Christmas.
Yeah, there's some good songs on there.
Got to. Oh, yeah. Yeah, you got to. All right, well, I think we got to move on here to Close to the Edge.
The ultimate masterpiece.
Is this the unanimous number one for all three of us? I would think it is.
It's probably my favorite album of all time. Gun to my head.
Yeah, it's a top 3 album all time.
Doesn't really have to be Gun to my head necessarily. Like this is my favorite album of all time.
If it's not number 1, it's number 2, and it's really close. So, yeah.
Yeah, what to say about Close to the Edge, man?
Well,
it is absolute perfection.
It's perfection.
We had that Bruford quote.
Yeah.
I think it was Bruford. Hold on, let me see if I can find this. I sent the picture of it a while back.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. If you want to look that up in the Discord real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean this album pushes every boundary. The musicians are all pushing themselves. You can hear it in their performance. I mean, this is hard shit to play. It's hard shit to play perfectly. It's hard shit to play perfectly together, and they did it. I mean, it is absolutely phenomenal.
It's an album this is an album that I have heard. I couldn't even guess how many times I have heard Close to the Edge in my life. Hundreds of times. It's probably the album that I've heard.
Yeah, hundreds is not.
It's probably the album that I have heard the most in my life. It's probably the album I've listened to the most in my life. I was probably like 5 the first time I heard it.
Wow.
I'm so like intensely familiar with it, and it's like so much a part of my life, and it's such a perfect album, and it's my favorite album that it's like almost hard to talk about. If that makes any sense?
Yeah, I mean, you have an intimate relationship with this album at this point.
Yeah,
I do too. I mean, it's a part of me. Close to the Edge.
There was something supernatural. Not literally, although like I don't know. The older I get, maybe at least somewhat literally. There was something supernatural happening when they were doing this thing. And you can't really put it into words.
I wrote that it's an incredibly spiritual record.
It is.
It is.
The lyrics,
the finale, the I Get Up, I Get Down finale of Close to the Edge is a religious experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you and I specifically the last the second 5 minutes of the 10 minutes of In You and I, absolutely a religious experience as well. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that makes Close to the Edge so incredible, and what makes all of Classic Yes so amazing, is it's a 5-piece band working absolutely as a perfect democratic unit where no one member is dominating another member.
Do you mean musically while playing? Or do you mean in the writing composition?
In every way, musically, compositionally, performance-wise. I mean, like, obviously there are, like, moments of the album where not all 5 of them are playing at once, but it's balanced flawlessly. there's no one member you can point to of the 5 of these dudes on Close to the Edge and on All Classic Yes, but particularly on Close to the Edge, where like you could say that's the guy who was like carrying the record. It's impossible. And anyone who would like try to argue it, I don't think it would make any sense.
I definitely agree.
And there are almost no other bands that worked as like a perfect unit in the way Yes did when they were at their peak. And so that's one like sort of objective kind of like solid reason why Close to the Edge is so good. They're working together incredibly.
Well, I think a lot of this was spearheaded by, like, John Anderson, unlike anyone else in progressive music, has such a handle on, like, the conceptual side and, like, steering the music thematically. I mean, he was reading, I think, Lord of the Rings at the time, and I don't know, something about it. I mean, he was on tour, he'd, like, written down some ideas or something, and then...
Siddhartha
by Herman Hesse was the book that he was reading. And he
kind of, I think he went with... and met with like Steve Howe, and they kind of hashed out the beginning parts of the song, and then it just kind of grew out of that or something. But I mean, I see that throughout. Anderson just seems to be directing he's kind of like tamping it down and directing the thematic elements of the music and keeping the reins on it that way. Not that the other guys aren't doing that, but I think Anderson is incredibly integral to that, and I think it's interesting because he's mostly just the vocalist. Not to knock that at anybody who does vocals or something like that, but I think that's crazy to me how much of an influence he has over the writing.
Well, and let's talk about the vocals here for a second too, because the vocal performance is as much an instrument here as the guitar or the keyboards or the bass or the drums.
Right.
Yeah, John doesn't even say any actual lyrics until probably 5-6 minutes into
the title.
But he's still there.
He's there.
But he's still there.
Yeah.
And he's also doing he plays aux percussion when they have live performances. So I'm sure he was doing a lot of that in the studio too.
Yeah.
Even when he's not singing.
When he's responsible for like the sampling, like the birds in the beginning, the water rushing, and all those sorts of things.
One of the great fade-ins of all time.
That intro to Close to the Edge.
Yeah.
That intro to Close to the Edge is red hot too, man.
And like that fade-in is just it works so good. My hypothesis, and I'm sure that like I could look this up. I'm sure it's been like talked about. My hypothesis is that it like came out of improv, but that it like was polished into something through composed. But that fade in at the beginning, like if they would have just gone like straight into that like atonal crazy intro, just like from the very first second, I mean it still would have been great, but like the fade in just is perfect.
Well, like it's still jarring when it hits.
And it is still jarring.
It is, yeah.
But it's almost more jarring because like the tension mounts because the volume is rising. And then when it hits, it hits hard. Yeah.
I remember hearing this as a lad, and that intro just blasting me into another dimension. When I heard it, like, what the hell are these guys doing? I mean, I'd been listening to AC/DC and Van Halen and Styx and shit before.
Before
I heard Close to the Edge.
That's the experience I was trying to describe to you when we talked about this like a few months ago. Remember, I like I said, I'm never gonna live this down. I called it.
I know what you're
I called it. It was like the first 2 to 3 minutes of this song are stupid, and what I meant is it was just like so completely. I was just like baffled. I couldn't figure out what the fuck was happening on this.
Yeah,
this
like
music.
what the fuck is Wakeman doing on
the
beginning of Close to the Edge? What the fuck is he doing? I've heard this.
He's channeling.
He's channeling something.
Yeah, he's channeling demons.
I've heard this album, as I already said, hundreds of times. I do not know what Rick Wakeman is doing on the beginning of the title track. Like, I don't know what he's doing, and I don't want to know.
I don't either. I mean, it's some kind of synthesizer, and but I have no idea what he's playing.
1,000 things a second.
I don't know if it's something sequenced or if he's actually performing that. It's
like pins and needles dropping, and like everything's so precise.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It's like drops of water, you know, and it's like, just really precise poking kind of. But everything's in its right place. And that's the cool thing about this song is it's 18 minutes long and everything is extremely well integrated. Like it grows out of.
It's in perfect proportion.
Yeah, it grows out of itself. The themes are revisited in different ways, and everything. Yeah, everything is deliberate. That's just something I really appreciate about it. And in fact, I think of it as like a musical allegory of growth and like ascension towards a higher point or something like that. So Anthony, I think you're right. There was probably something supernatural or spiritual going on.
There was something supernatural going on with this. And I do agree with you, Jacob, by the way, that like John Anderson is like the vibe of Yes. And the vibe of Yes is very important.
Yeah. I think he's like the if the rest of the band is the machine, he's like the power that feeds the machine, like the spirit that feeds it to move it or something like that.
Yeah.
Not that they don't all do that, but that's kind of what I think of it like.
Or like if the rest of them are like the limbs or the brain, then like he's the heart, and you do have to have the heart.
Yeah.
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 Because there's plenty of like there's a ton of like extremely technical rock music even from the early 70s that's like not even on the same level as this in terms of quality, even if it is equally technical. Yeah.
I'm also going to make a claim here. I was wondering what you all thought. Of these 5 bands, we take. I know it's a little difficult with Crimson because they've had different guitarists come in and out. But I mean, Fripp's the main dude, so. I think Steve Howe might be the most well-rounded guitarist of the bunch. I mean, he especially across the entire album, but he kind of shows his chops with. I mean, he's got the classical guitar playing, and I see that more on Fragile than on Close to the Edge, but it's still there on here. He's obviously rock and blues, and then he's got the country stuff on Siberian Khatru, and then some jazzy parts as well. And he seems to be just be able to like seamlessly weave between the different styles of playing, sometimes in the same track, which I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, the intro of In You and I is just absolutely beautiful, and not even complicated. It's like it's not like technically complex, but it's just absolutely beautiful. The acoustic guitar intro of In You and I.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful in its simplicity, actually. I think Steve Howe is probably the most versatile. I think he's he's the virtuoso of these 5 guitar players. A virtuoso in that he could perform in any style of music and do so competently. Whereas a guy like Fripp, even though I know he's done it, it's difficult to imagine him performing in any other venue besides King Crimson.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's difficult to imagine David Gilmour doing anything but Pink Floyd.
Yeah, how did he has the Asia connection too, so he's playing like 80s pop rocky kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Steve Hackett has the same like extreme. He has that incredibly.
Yep.
Not always. Well, I was going to say something that I decided not to say. He does have that like immediately recognizable tone and timbre, in the same way that David Gilmour and Fripp do. Yeah.
He's really big into world music, so he's a little. Yeah, I think he's a little different because I've listened to so much of his solo stuff now. I mean, he keeps just pumping out albums. He's had one come out this year, and he's having another one come out later.
Yeah, he has a new one this year. I saw that today.
So he's a little more, I guess. He's pretty versatile as well, but he's forever wed to Genesis in a way that. Howe's obviously out forever wed to Yes. I think isn't he the only original member still in Yes? I think.
A lot of he's not an original member. Peter Banks was the original guitarist.
Of the classic lineup.
No original members anymore.
The ever present Chris Squire unfortunately left us a few years ago. May he rest in peace.
Yeah.
Yes.
And some of the best bass playing of all time in classic Yes, and On Close to the Edge included.
Oh God.
The bass
I remember
line,
I met this kid. I met this kid in college when I was looking for some guys to play music with, and my buddy played in a group they were pretty good, and I went over to their house one time with my guitar just to jam a bit, and this kid I was talking to him, their bass player, and I was like, You ever listen to Yes? And he, without skipping a beat, he just rips into that opening bass line in Close to the Edge.
Nice.
You know the part I'm talking about? He ripped right the fuck into it, and it was just killing it. And I was like,
That's
you and I are going to
my
get along.
guy.
Unfortunately, we never really did anything together. But yeah, but I was very impressed.
I never knew that. That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, Chris Squire looms heavy on any bass player, or at least any rock bass player, or at least any rock bass player that's worth a shit.
Well, just the tone of his bass playing. Yeah, just the tone of his bass playing. It's so
yeah,
damn
and
heavy.
it's so melodic as well.
Such a huge
it's like it's so
sound.
thick, but it's also so
Absolutely.
melodic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well,
And he and Bruford play so
They had a
perfectly
chemistry.
together,
They
too.
definitely had a chemistry.
They lay an amazing foundation for Close to the Edge.
so yeah, I found this the quote. Unless you want to say anything else, so I figured it'd be a good way to conclude this talking about this album. But I think Bruford summed it up pretty well. I mean, he called us out here. He said, in 40 years' time, along with 3 or 4 other albums from that era, people will pick out Close to the Edge and say that's what progressive rock was all about. So I think he pinned us down pretty well, and everyone else.
That is
Spot
true.
on,
Yep.
Dr. Bruford.
I also want to say that the Rick Wakeman's Moog solo, and I'm gonna say Moog, even though I know that's wrong. Just saying Moog feels wrong to me. Rick Wakeman's Moog solo, and towards the end of In You and I, like after the acoustic guitar break, is top 5 keyboard solos of all time.
Yeah.
The keyboard solo that really shines, that like is most famous, is obviously the organ solo in Close to the Edge, the title song. But my favorite keyboard solo on this album is that Moog solo. It's not even very long, but just absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Also, the harpsichord.
There's some gear
the
nerds that are
harpsichord
shitting
solo.
in their pants right now
Why?
because you refuse to call it Moog.
I'm not going to call it Moog. Do you call it Moog?
There are some gear nerds. Oh yeah, I do. Since I was once corrected.
No, I'm going to call it the wrong thing.
I think I am too. I like Moog better.
Yeah, and it is better.
The keyboard gear nerds will continue to shit themselves.
Perfect. Sounds
whenever
good.
you do
Sounds
so.
good to me.
And the harpsichord solo in Siberian Control is also incredible. Wakeman is
that really is
shredding
just some amazing shit. Yeah.
I think the opening
so many
riff,
like just incredible transitions all over this album.
Well, yeah, I was going to talk about the opening riff from Siberian Control, that country, that slide that comes in, and then it hits, and a complete transition off of that, 5 seconds into the song.
Also, from Bruford in the final crescendo, you know how in Siberian Control there's like that last crescendo, and then it kind of breaks into the last jam and the fade out. You know what I'm talking about?
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
The last crescendo, Bruford is like doing some crazy stuff on the snare, and it doesn't happen in any live recording that I've heard, even live recordings with Bruford. I don't know why, but Bruford is just like going crazy on the snare during that crescendo, and it just builds and builds, and he's getting faster, and it gets louder and louder. I always pay attention to the drumming on that crescendo. Bruford is just, I don't know what he's doing on that snare drum, but he's going ham.
Bruford is a phenom, dude.
Yeah.
He only got better.
We've talked about this before. We've talked about this before, but I don't care nearly as much for anything that Yes did after Close to the Edge as much as I do for Fragile and Close to the Edge and Yes album. And I attribute a lot of that to the lack of Bruford.
Close to the Edge is the best, but Topographic Oceans and Relayer and Fragile and Yes album are all on somewhat equal footing for me.
Relayer's awesome. Yeah.
Fragile and Yes album definitely, but there's something that they lose with Bruford beyond just the drum performance. And knowing what he did with Crimson afterwards, and having read his book too, I think he was sort of a force holding back some of the excess with Yes, and that's obvious when you think about Tales from Topographic Oceans compared to Close to the Edge. And I loved Tales too. I'm not gonna say Tales is bad, but it doesn't do nearly as much for me as Close to the
Edge. I was gonna bring up this quote. I didn't want to end on a negative note because I tend to do that for some reason. So, but I'll bring it up here since we mentioned it. Like, I think Bruford took exception to Anderson's use of the total mass retain theme. He really didn't like that. And I found a quote of his. It's from this interview where I found a bunch of the other stuff, and he allegedly Bruford said that instead of calling it total mass retain, he said, "quote We might as well just call it puke." I think he just was confused about what it was about, or he thought it was word salady or something like that.
If that's true, that's insane. I love
it sounds
that.
cool.
Yeah.
I don't know what the hell it means, but I don't know.
If one of these 5 dudes would have been given like just a little bit more input than they ended up having, then the album would have been thrown off balance a little bit. Somehow these 5 dudes managed to like balance each other out flawlessly on this album.
Yep.
Which I already said, but I think just hearing that quote from Bruford, which I think is stupid, just confirms my opinion that the 5 of them brought out the best and tamped down the worst in each other during this album, like on this album.
Yeah, it's an example of true synergy. The sum here really is greater than the whole here really is greater than the sum.
Yeah,
of its parts.
I mean that might be when you say they lose something, losing Bruford. Obviously, they lose his talents. Obviously, they lose his influence and input. But maybe what they lost was just the chemistry that they were able to achieve on this album. I mean, I don't know even if they had stayed together, if they would have been able to make anything close to this again. This might have been a lightning in a bottle. I don't know.
I don't agree that much is lost after this. Although obviously Bruford is an amazing drummer. I think he only gets better. I think that Tales and Relayer, and then also a lot of the stuff that comes after, is incredible as well.
It's all top notch.
Like, I respect James's perspective there. I don't think it's like a daft perspective, but I don't personally agree.
I think I'm in the, or yeah, I think I'm in the same mindset as James on that. I think they do lose something, but I wonder if we're in the minority of Yes fans on that.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to look at the ratings on Prog Archives. That would tell.
I do really like the Revealing Science of God from Tales. That's a really good track.
Oh, I do too. I love Tales, man. It's just like Close to the Edge is like I said, it's a religious experience.
Yeah. I mean, Tales and Relayer are like hardcore 10s for me, and I guess like I guess Close to the Edge would just like be an 11 or something.
Yeah.
But
yeah, close to the Edge transcends.
10 out of 10, but better.
Transcends rating.
Yeah.
One more little anecdote here before we move on. I told you guys I met John Anderson once, right?
Yeah, not that long ago, right?
Not very long ago. Yeah, back in 2018. Actually, no, it was 2019. So, my fiance works for a women's clothing company, and she was working her shift one day, and in walks this hippie chick and her fella, and they're sitting around in the store, and Haley's helping them try on a bunch of different clothes and shit, and eventually they get to talking, and she's just like, so what are you guys doing in town for the day? And they're like, oh well, we're here for the John Anderson show, and Haley's like, oh yeah, John Anderson from Yes, I love John Anderson. And the woman that she's been helping this whole time is like, oh yeah, this is John Anderson. And so it turns out that she's just been helping out John Anderson and his girlfriend this whole time, and they end up shooting the shit a little bit longer, and they gave Haley backstage passes for the show. So I hauled ass up to Boulder and went and got to see the show, which was awesome. Obviously, I had never seen John Anderson before. And then I got to go backstage afterward and meet the man. And I'm standing there like trying not to just drop my spaghetti all over the place and say something stupid. I'm like, hey,
that's so magical, dude.
Yeah, I think I was just like, thank you so much for everything. Like your music is so important to me, and he was really cool. And of course, I won't trouble you with an impression, but he was like, you got a good one there, mate. Referring to Haley, so that was pretty cool. I have the John Anderson seal of approval for my future wife.
What a saint. That's divine, dude.
He's a great guy.
I already knew that story, but hearing it again, that is so amazing, dude.
Dude, he was so friendly, and we weren't the only ones backstage. There were a bunch of other people back there, and a lot of, especially even younger people like us. And he was just talking to everybody, having a great time. He seemed so happy to be there with everybody that was there, even though he didn't know them. It was such a cool experience.
Such a good soul.
Yeah.
Such Absolutely. A good soul from day one. Haley didn't recognize him?
No.
Okay. I mean, that's understandable. I would have, and you would have probably.
Yeah, I would have, but...
Yeah. Yeah, we talked a lot about Close to the Edge. Obviously, we're passionate.
It's hard
about
not to. Like I said, I mean, I think we all agree this is the unanimous number one. I think, except for maybe Jacob.
And I think probably most fans of this music
it's
would
the number one on
agree
Prog
too.
Archives.
Not 100%.
Well, so let's talk about that real quick. Actually, I remember for years, the Prog Archives ratings would flip around the top three all the time. But the top three was always Close to the Edge, Selling England by the Pound, and Thick as a Brick. And those three would just rotate at number one every time someone would write a new review with a new rating. And it would change the result of the algorithm and bump something up to number one.
They're all really close now.
Close to the Edge was normally always number one. It was normally always number one. There was a brief period where it would sometimes flip with Selling England. But Close to the Edge normally was always number one. But Thick as a Brick and Selling England would flip between 2 and 3 constantly.
Well, so they have this adjusted rating. I'm looking at this now. The main rating, I guess, is just the average for Wish You Were Here, In the Court of the Crimson King, and Thick as a Brick are all tied. So technically, if we just go based on that, it's Close to the Edge at 1, Selling England by 2, then the rest are tied for 3. Unless you take that little adjusted rating.
Now, interestingly enough, let me go to... I pretty much know it by memory, but I'm pulling it up just to make sure I don't misremember. If you go to the top albums of all time on Rate Your Music, which is all albums, obviously, not just progressive rock albums. One second. A couple of interesting things about it. 2 of these albums are in the top 10 of all time. Number 2 of all time is Wish You Were Here, and number 3 is Court of the Crimson King. And then you have to go... Number 1 is OK Computer.
Of course it is.
We already talked about this.
I listened to that today.
I
don't get it. And anyway.
Oh, I get it.
It's a good album. I just...
That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
And also Dark Side of the Moon is another album that's also in the top 10 of all time on Prog Archives and also on Your Music.
As it should be.
Yep, as it should be.
And then you have to scroll down to the next highest rated one of these top 5 is Close to the Edge.
I'll bet Selling England is the one is the lowest rated of the 5 on Rate Your Music.
I'm not sure which one between Jethro, Tull, and Genesis is rated higher. Close to the Edge, I think it's around in the 70s. Hang on. Close to the Edge right now is 52 overall. Which it should be. That's incredibly high on the charts, but I mean it should be higher.
Is Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar higher than Close to the Edge?
Yeah, that's way up. That's number 11.
Yeah.
That is a great record though.
Yeah.
But conversation.
I haven't heard it.
It's good.
I
it's
haven't
good,
heard
man.
it, but I'm sure it's really good.
Thick as a Brick is number 249 overall of all time, which is also very high in the grand scheme of things. Probably should be
how
higher,
far does
though.
that list go?
It goes up to 5,000 albums. Yeah. Have you never looked at these charts before, James?
I've only dabbled.
Really good way to find new shit.
I'm very new to Rate Your Music. I've only been using it now for maybe 6 months.
Really, really good way to find new shit. And Selling England is 208 overall. So the lowest rated of these 5 on Rate Your Music is Thick as a Brick. But all of these albums are easily in the top 250. In the upper part of the top 1,000.
That's all.
And 2 of them are also in the top 10. So
that says a lot.
It says a lot about, like, progressive rock music is acclaimed among the music nerd populace in general, more so than I think some might think. Was my main point in talking about that.
Yeah, unless the sample population on Rate Your Music is biased towards prog rock.
No, they're not
towards prog rock nerds, but I wouldn't expect that to be the case.
If you look at like contemporary prog rock, is not very doesn't get a lot of high ratings or attention on there.
I wouldn't think so.
Yeah. I mean, all those bands are iconic.
These 5 albums that we're talking about are like incredibly widely acclaimed albums in the music sphere in general, not just in the prog rock sphere.
Yeah, I mean, all those bands are iconic. They got a lot of radio play even back in the 70s, even though it was just kind of like weird, excessive, at least some people saw as excessive rock music. It still got a lot of radio play, especially Pink Floyd. I mean, in a lot of ways, Pink Floyd is they're a popular band too. I mean, they're like, I don't know, they're kind of mixed in with pop music as much as they are with progressive rock, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, they've had the benefit of also releasing I don't know, Pink Floyd had The Wall, and that was hugely commercially successful, and Wish You Were Here and so forth, and it allowed people to go back into the rest of their discography. I think it's the same for all the bands. I think the 80s helped them out a lot as well.
Yeah, Owner of a Lonely Heart was a huge hit.
And then all of Phil Collins' stuff with Genesis in the 80s.
What was that? What was the stupid thing I read about Owner of a Lonely Heart? Oh, it was from that horrible piece that the Atlantic published.
Oh, that was trash.
I don't know. I really wish you'd never sent me that.
What the fuck did that asshole say about Owner of a Lonely Heart? It was something really stupid, so I won't bother repeating it.
Yeah.
I'd rather
not talk about that article.
What are we talking about next?
Yeah. Not worth it.
We are talking about Selling England by the Pound.
Next, yeah.
By Genesis. Next.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's... Go ahead.
This is the most British album ever made.
Without a doubt,
yeah. In the sense, I mean, I'm being facetious, but this is an album that very consciously and very intentionally channels the aesthetics of, like, Englishness in ways that I can't.
Yes.
Like, I have an intellectual understanding of what that entails, but I mean, I'm not English. I've never been there. I don't really know any English people, so I can't really pop off that much about it.
It's the most stereotypically English album of all time.
Yeah, Ian said he listened to this album on a train in the English countryside when he went over there.
That sounds amazing.
He was like, it was perfect. It was perfect. It fit the setting more perfectly than anything else I could.
But you said stereotypical, Jacob, which implies kind of a...
I don't mean it to be
like
negative. Have a negative kind of... Yeah, no. Just, it's what Americans...
Archetypal.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay.
I think it's just self-aware. Yeah, I think it's just self-aware. I mean, there's like this Shakespearean delivery that we get from Peter Gabriel on the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, like
it's quintessential. I think that's the right word here. It's quintessentially English.
Quintessentially English.
Yeah.
Is how funny is this album? Like, is this album funny?
The wordplay is incredible.
I think some people think it is.
There's a wit to it, but
witty is a better description.
I don't laugh out loud.
I know what I like. I think it's a funny song.
I know what I like is a funny song, and parts of Battle of Epping Forest are.
Yeah. Those are my 2 favorite tracks on the album. Honestly, it's funny how that works out.
Oh, but that's a bold statement.
Firth the Fifth and Cinema Show, my friend.
Firth the Fifth's great.
Educate yourself.
I know what I like in Epping Forest, man. It's so good.
Never mind. Lost my train of thought there.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
This fucking guy.
This fucking guy.
So Selling England is an album that I really did not develop a serious interest in until I was maybe 22, almost 23.
Oh, is that true?
All of these other albums I had been very interested in from a much earlier age. Yes, and King Crimson and Pink Floyd in particular. I didn't get into Tull till high school, and I got into Genesis in high school, but not as much the album as a whole. I listened to Firth of Fifth more times than I could count, and sort of overlooked the rest of it. And then I rediscovered it when I was getting out of college, and absolutely fell in love with it. This and Foxtrot both. There are moments here that are some of my favorite moments in music.
Example. I mean, I know what you're going to say, but just...
Well, the Firth of Fifth keyboard part is just...
masterpiece?
It's another religious experience.
Yeah.
Especially when you get Tony Banks performing it in 2 octaves on synthesizer with organ and the bass. So he's playing the top part of the melody, the right hand, in 2 octaves, panned out to each side, and then you've got the organ in the bottom playing the bass notes, and it's just this enormous sound, and it's intoxicating. It's fucking amazing. I absolutely love that moment.
Absolutely agree.
And then Cinema Show too. The last 5 minutes or so of Cinema Show.
And Hackett's solo in the latter part of Firth of Fifth is also a religious experience.
Oh God.
His best.
Yeah.
Hackett's
absolutely.
best recorded playing ever.
Yeah, I mean that's what everyone thinks of when they think of Steve Hackett.
Yeah, and it's hard. I mean, if I was a guitarist, I could probably formulate the vocabulary as to why it's good, but it doesn't sound like particularly complicated playing. But it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, he takes you on a journey. It's a solo part, but it's a composition. It's not a demonstration of his ability. It's a piece that's written to be played as it's played. And there are embellishments that are specific to Hackett's playing, obviously, but there is a piece.
Yeah, like Hackett's style, both as a composer and as a player, is epitomized by that solo in Firth of Fifth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
And
there are other moments where he touches on that same style.
After the Ordeal is a great solo piece from Hackett.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And we get something like that on Foxtrot with Horizons too, and then there's something like the Firth of Fifth part in the outro of Supper's Ready, and other parts of Supper's Ready too, but in particular that outro where he's doing those big high notes, big bends, just really expanding the scope of that section.
Yeah, I think you said what, that you the first time you listened to this really was what, when you were 23, 22, something like that?
Well, the first time that it was a rediscovery, because I've been listening to Genesis for a long time. I first listened through all this stuff when I was a junior or senior in high school, and I don't mean to say that it didn't affect me then, but I heard it. I listened to it again after college, and just was reawakened as to how.
No, that's So that's the point here that I'm gonna make. So Genesis of these 5 bands is easily they're the odd one out for me. They're the one I've listened to the least. I know as a progressive music fan, I mean that's a heresy to say that. I mean I'm familiar with the 80s Collins stuff, and I listened to Nursery Crime probably the most of the early stuff. But I think I'd listened to Selling England maybe one time back in college, and then when we were doing an episode that we've since trashed, we did our top 15. You had me listen to it, and I was like, oh yeah, this is a really good album. I don't know why I haven't listened to it before. But then I put it on the back burner again, and then we did it for this. I knew we were going to work up to this, so I listened to it 3 or 4 times since we decided to do this episode. And I think it's easily the biggest grower of the 5 albums that we've talked about. I notice every time I listen to it, all the little subtleties, especially in the lyrics and the wordplay of Peter Gabriel, the way they have got things balanced in the mix, the sort of ways they layer the instruments and stuff. And I think like Close to the Edge, it's another true group effort where everyone's just firing. The chemistry is beautiful. Yeah. But it's not, to me, it's not as in the excellence of the album is not as in your face, and I think it requires, at least for me, it required multiple listens to truly appreciate the genius of it. And I'm there with it now. Like it's an easy 10 out of 10. Like it's an incredible record.
There's that
but
dry,
it took me a while to get there.
There's that dry Britishness to it that we talked about, and that doesn't really pop off, at least for people with like our, cultural background, doesn't really pop off as instantaneously as other sorts of like aesthetics,
right?
And I think and also I did fall in love with Selling England by the Pound in high school, but it was a slow burn for me then as well. I think just the three of us don't necessarily immediately connect with that vibe as much as we do what we're getting on these other 5 albums, because it's very different. It's very dry British, sort of like tongue-in-cheek style, very much from Peter Gabriel, on pretty much the entire album. We're getting this sort of high neoclassical, beautiful religious experience moments from the instruments. But Peter Gabriel is Peter Gabriel's being is being very witty and kind of tongue in cheek on almost this whole album. This is not the Genesis album that Peter Gabriel is this is not the Peter Gabriel Genesis album for me. He's The Lamb is the Peter Gabriel Genesis album. That's his Genesis album. Peter Gabriel, he does a lot of great stuff on Selling England, but he's the least vital part of Selling England for me. I think really The Lamb is really Peter Gabriel's Genesis album.
That's interesting.
Maybe that's controversial.
I couldn't say personally that again, like I said, I really need to go dive into the rest of Genesis's discography to make a better determination. But I guess my first impression of listening to this album, I still thought Gabriel was very forward in the record, and he's very noticeable, and that was one of the first things I was drawn to, more so than I think I wrote down on my notes that Ian Anderson and Peter Gabriel easily the most talented vocalists and lyricists of the bunch. I don't know that it's close. Trying to think. I mean, John Anderson, I don't want to say anything bad about him. John Anderson's obviously an excellent vocalist and lyricist as well. But yeah, I don't know. I always felt that Ian Anderson and Gabriel are much more forward on these albums than Anderson was on Close to the Edge.
Interesting. I definitely disagree, but that's an interesting perspective to hear.
Cool.
Yeah, I would disagree too. John Anderson is, I think when I think prog vocalist, he's the guy that comes to mind. Peter Gabriel probably right behind him, but Anderson would be number
one. The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is really Peter Gabriel's magnum opus, which I don't know, maybe that's controversial, but I think by far.
No, I think a lot of people think that's the best one from what I've read.
That is not an album that I am nearly familiar enough with.
Yeah, it's a masterpiece.
Yep, I need to check it
out. I need to revisit it.
It's different.
I know Selling England and Foxtrot like the back of my hand.
You're not that familiar with The Lamb, James? I mean, it's so long.
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think I've heard it all the way through more than 5 times.
Yeah, there are some absolutely incredible moments from Tony Banks and Steve Hackett on that album too. But it's mostly Peter. It's Peter Gabriel forward.
I remember those.
It's Peter Gabriel forward.
I think it would do more for me now than it would have when I was just getting into Genesis, or even when I revisited them, at 22 or 23. I think it would do a lot more for me now. My palate's expanded.
We haven't really talked about the rhythm section on Selling England, which I think is phenomenal from Rutherford and,
dude,
Big Phil.
Phil. Big fucking Phil. God, what an animal. What an animal. And who knew there was such a pop sensibility hiding behind the drum set in Genesis?
Yeah.
I mean, because he's playing some fucking wonky shit with Genesis, and then he puts out No Jacket Required, which is just a huge album. I mean, that music, everybody could enjoy that music.
There's no one who doesn't know it. Like you could find like any rando on the street and they probably know it.
I don't know if you've ever seen Phil Collins on stage, like when he's fronting the whatever band he's part of or whatever, and like the stage presence he has, like the showmanship of it as well. But behind the kit, you're right. It's so weird. Yeah. I guess when I first learned that Phil Collins was the drummer, and then I listened to an early Genesis record after knowing Phil Collins for Lion King and all that stuff, and you're just like, dude, it's
all the Disney.
Yeah, the dissonant. I just didn't understand how that worked.
Did he do Lion King? I'm only thinking of Tarzan.
That's not
he did
Tarzan, I think is what I meant.
He did Tarzan, and he also did Brother Bear, which is
Brother
kind of an
Bear,
obscure
that's right.
Disney movie.
So fact check, I meant Tarzan.
That one.
My bad.
Idiot.
So fucking stupid.
I'll be logging off now. Don't deserve to talk about Phil Collins anymore.
Get your Phil Collins Disney soundtrack knowledge right, or log off.
Best work. I'm sorry.
You have two options.
Sorry I messed that up.
Either get your shit together about Phil Collins' Disney history or log the fuck off.
Oh man, it's late. I don't know what to say.
More Fool Me is a beautiful song.
Yes, it is.
For not the first lead vocal from Phil on Genesis, but definitely the first great lead vocal from Phil on Genesis. Beautiful song. Love it. Adds to the flow and structure of the album in a very important way. And I feel like anyone who shit talks it doesn't really understand what it's doing on the album.
Are there people who shit talk it?
Yeah, there are a lot of people, just like neckbeardy prog fans who shit talk it. It's a very important part of the album, and it's a beautiful song, in my opinion.
Oh, I totally agree. There's no moment on Selling England that isn't totally vital to the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
Which is a through line for all five of these classic albums.
That's what I was going to say.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I definitely agree. And with that, should we move on here to number 5? Yeah, so Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. 1975, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. So just to get this rolling here, I had overlooked this one for a long time. Only as it compares to Dark Side and Animals, which are two of my favorite albums ever made. But this really is just a 10 out of 10. I mean, it's so good. It's
Absolutely.
so good. Yeah.
So that opinion like your extremely firm celebration of this album is very new. Like we were talking about this just like a week or two ago.
I know.
You were more hesitant. So tell me about your experience listening to this recently and what changed and what it was like. I'm curious.
So, the biggest thing that I noticed in I've listened to this 3 times since we spoke about it a few weeks ago, and what really stuck out to me was the subtleties. There's so much cool stuff that they're doing with synthesizers, especially. That's sort of underlying really underlying the entire album. Like every transition, you can find some keyboard fuckery that they're just placing really in the background of the music. It's very subtle, it's very ambient, but it works, and it ties the whole thing together really, really beautifully.
Rick Wright is absolutely essential
Yes.
to Pink Floyd in a way that not nearly
Totally
enough
agree.
people talk about.
He's
totally
the
agree.
chemistry between he and David Gilmour. I always say, and I always think about it in like Any Color You Like on Dark Side. I think it's like the pinnacle moment for those two and their chemistry. The way they play off each other. But yeah, it's just, I mean, the cool thing about Pink Floyd, Dark Side and Wish You Were Here especially, are just the atmosphere or the textures that are kind of introduced in the like spaciness of it. That they're like easily the most economical band of the five, in that they just make really efficient use of space and like placing notes in that space. Like they're not fast players, they're not overly technical players, but the kind of like atmosphere that they weave in playing off each other is done in a way that's quite different than what the other four bands are doing. And I argue, I mean, I think on these records they're doing it well. It's unique. I don't want to say it's necessarily better or worse than what the other bands are doing, but it's just completely uniquely them, I think.
Yeah, that adage of like it's not the notes, it's the space between the notes.
Yeah.
That's very much Pink Floyd's wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And I think like probably the most so on Wish You Were Here, and on Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Another one of the best first, in this case it might be like first 10 minutes. It's almost like a 10-minute intro. But definitely one of the best like first 5 minutes of any album ever is definitely happening here as well. That long build and that first solo of Shine On You Part 1.
Well, I think
absolutely beautiful.
I think the most haunting part is the dun 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 dun, like right when that comes in. Oh man.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Yeah, like
Gilmour he sells that little section, man. It's just perfect.
And then Rick Wright comes in with the keyboard right
and he's hanging back on the notes in just the right way. I mean, he plays that part perfectly.
They build the tension for the exact right amount of time before going into the riff.
That's exactly what I mean.
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, both of those tracks are great. And then just the stuff. Well, and we're talking about what Rick Wright's doing. I mean, you see on the second part, or the parts. What do they go through? 1 through.
Let's just say
4.
part 1 and part 2.
Yeah. So in part 2, the stuff that Rick Wright's doing in the middle to the end of that track that is some of the weirdest stuff in Pink Floyd's catalog, I think. And even.
I love how they play with the rhythm of that part too, of the motif for the solo section. So they're playing it in 6/8 in the first part, and then when they revisit it later, they put it into a 4/4 beat, and it's a little funkier, and it's just amazing stuff.
Yeah, and the final synth solo, which is like almost half the track of Welcome to the Machine, is some of my favorite like psychedelic synth of all time.
Yeah,
that song.
Yeah, he's getting it.
That is a very it's like a disconcerting, uncomfortable song to listen to. I mean, it's great, but it's just like they master that emotion.
I agree.
It makes you kind of like itchy, like
you're not happy while listening to it. Roger Waters is not going to make you happy. He's never gonna.
The whole album's very dark. This is the darkest album of these five by far, in my opinion.
That's interesting.
Maybe parts of Crimson
King.
Of
these five, yes.
Oh, these five albums?
I thought we were picking the darkest Pink Floyd.
I thought you meant darkest Pink Floyd album.
I was surprised at how surprised.
I was like, Animals is pretty dark,
obvious.
Man. But
yeah. Animals is dark. Animals is dark too. But no, this is a very dark record. I mean, Have a Cigar is more tongue in cheek, but the other four
Have a Cigar
tracks
is dark too.
There's a darkness there. There's a darkness to it, but
it's angry.
It's angry. Yep, that's right. But it's not.
Like
there's a sadness
descent into extreme mental illness and suicide.
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of darkness.
There's a sadness to the other tune.
Well, yeah, it doesn't give you that uplifting at the end. So Dark Side. I mean, Dark Side's dealing with. I think Roger Waters has said he never understood why people. I mean, I guess. We talked about the space, so the people associate Dark Side with like outer space or something like that. And he goes, but I never really understood it. Yeah, have you ever seen that? People use it like the laser shows, like sci-fi type of stuff.
Just because of the cover.
Yeah.
So because of the cover. Yeah.
It's just like a superficial. ice cold
Yeah.
take based
Yeah.
on the cover.
Dark Side to me is
It's about the moon,
yeah.
right? The album's about the moon, right?
yeah. Dark Side to I mean, it's like that's a really visceral like.
Freezing cold take.
Yeah, well, Dark Side's like a really visceral, embodied experience. But at the very end of it, I think with Brain Damage, you get that like weird psychedelic like. That's such a weird track on Dark Side of the Moon where it's just really Roger Waters forward and it's super super psychedelic, and then it ends with Eclipse and it just like lifts you back up, you know, and then it kind of brings you back around. So it's like lurking.
Yeah.
So like, you know, the heartbeats comes back and it's like, oh, I could loop back into this, whatever. And that's the fucking creepiest thing about Dark Side of the Moon. But there's at least that moment, that hope that it gives you.
That's true.
Yeah, every time I listen to Speak to Me in Eclipse are two of the most unnerving sorts of pieces of music I think I've ever listened to in the context of the whole album. But yeah, I don't get that with Wish You Were Here.
Yeah, like Eclipse is happy. Like Eclipse is happy, but in a way that's like there's something not right about it. You're like, this is like, it's happy in the way that like someone who like is on heroin is happy, where there's like some dark there's like something about the happiness that is wrong.
It's happy coming out of the previous 7 tracks.
Yeah.
That are all just horribly dark. I mean, good Lord, the lyrics on Time are just inescapably dark.
Oh yeah, I think of it every time I almost every birthday I think of Time.
Every birthday, yeah. Well, 1 year closer to death. That's the way to contextualize a birthday. Thanks, Pink Floyd.
And then one day you'll find 10 years have got behind you. Such a simple line,
Jesus.
but such a brutal
They're
one.
obviously really brutal, but I think there's a hope in those, especially when they give you the break on the reprise in Time, where it brings you. I mean, yeah, it's just home again, and then it's a very like nostalgic thing, and then this idea of like, I don't know, I always found Time to be, it's really dark, but it's also hopeful. It's like kind of like kicking in the ass, like don't just take life for granted to go do something or about it or whatever. But yeah, I was gonna say, I wish you were here. I wish you were here. You don't get any of that. It's just really sad. And they're writing about Syd Barrett, who's had this tragic sort of fallout of Pink Floyd, and I just don't get much of the hope out of that album. And you get that on Animals too. There's not much hope in the album. It just starts getting really sad and dark, which is, I love it, but I definitely prefer the kind of juxtaposition on Dark Side, at least emotionally. But yeah, Wish You Were Here's pretty freaking dark.
Yeah, one other thing I want to talk about with Wish You Were Here too is just the production. That's one element that really stuck out to me on these last few listens. Production is something that it's taken me until the last few years to really pay attention to when I'm listening to music, and it's very, very sophisticated on this album, more so I think than anything else we've talked about tonight. You can tell the technology's evolved a little bit in the few years since the last 4 records had come out, and not to mention the budget that this album probably had compared to the previous 4, because Dark Side was such a hit.
Yeah.
And there's one moment especially that I'm thinking of in the intro to Wish You Were Here, the title track. They pan all the way out right, so everything is panned out hard right, and you've got this lo-fi acoustic guitar part that's very, very quiet.
Well, it's got that static chirping in your ear too.
Yep, exactly. And they do that, they speed up like an old classical piece. It's like a violin piece that they speed up to in the pan. So while they're panning, you're getting this violin piece that just cuts hard to the right, and then you're in the intro to Wish You Were Here. And then eventually they bring it all back and open up the whole mix, and you get the full song.
It's so cool.
But it's little elements like that really make Wish You Were Here.
I think
so phenomenal.
The subtlety of Dark Side and Wish You Were Here is something that they had mastered, and other bands could only hope to emulate it. I think, not that there wasn't subtlety in these other records, or that other bands couldn't do that. It's just I think Pink Floyd were the masters of that.
Well, and it's the simplest music that we've talked about tonight in terms of the compositions. It's it's the most down to earth, and with that they play a lot with the atmosphere, the space in the music, and the themes are very present. I mean, this is lyrically important music. You can't help but listen to the lyrics with Pink Floyd.
Yeah, the lyrics, the lyrics are very important. Yeah,
it's a lot easier, I think, to listen to Close to the Edge or Selling England by the Pound more in terms of the general composition, the symphony, whereas with Pink Floyd, these are songs.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Which might be one of the reasons why the like general rock music audience is more receptive to Pink Floyd.
Well,
yeah.
If you watch, I haven't watched interviews with every single band member of all these bands we've talked about, but if you watch interviews with both David Gilmour and Roger Waters, they're both like extremely emotional dudes. Like they wear their emotions on their, especially Roger Waters, and I know he was the kind of conceptual leader of Pink Floyd during these years, and as you said, it's really down to earth, visceral, emotional. It can touch everyone. It has popular appeal in that way, but it still manages to be. There's still a bunch of virtuosos weaving this, composing this music. I think. I don't know.
Pink Floyd and specifically Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here are probably the best argument for vinyl as a format, because these two albums, when you listen to them on wax, is a whole new level. Maybe not a whole new level, but a new level.
I've heard that
First
before,
time I ever listened to Dark Side on wax was... Have you never done it before, Jacob?
I have not.
I know James has.
I have.
Yeah.
Many times.
Oh, man.
I'm missing out. I know. That's like the sole reason I want to get a record player. That's like the first album I'm going to buy.
Oh, yeah. Toby Hoy's Basement in high school, man. with Ed's big fucking huge system that he had.
Man, I have those records. I should go spin them right now. I should log the fuck off of this and go spin them right now.
I agree.
Yeah. So, why don't we do a worst to best for these five for each of us?
It's gonna be hard,
with the knowledge that I think we would rate all five as 10s. I think all three of us would rate all five as 10s.
I would rate all five of these albums 10 out of 10.
Would you, Jacob?
Oh yeah, easily.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
basically a top
worst
5.
To best.
Worst to best. Okay, worst to best. Wish You Were Here, Court of the Crimson King, Thick as a Brick, Selling England, Close to the Edge.
All right, you do yours, Jacob.
Let me clarify. I don't mean that as worst to best. That's my list of preferences.
Yeah.
I mean that should go without saying.
Same.
But
anyone who takes the phrase worst to best that literally is dense.
As I've mentioned, I only reference Plato's Form of the Good in making this list, so this is the definitive list.
Right. Yeah, we forgot. Jacob is a demigod.
We're getting an official tier list.
Is attuned to the.
Yep.
Yeah. Jacob is attuned to the world of forms in a way that we more.
So I'll let you all pick.
The music of the spheres plays for Jacob.
Yeah, I'll let you guys have your preferential list, and you can do that. And then I'll set it right with mine with the finale here.
All right, let's hear the. So I'm doing mine. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna qualify it after I say this. So, worst to best, Thick as a Brick, Selling England, Wish You Were Here, Court of the Crimson King, Close to the Edge. Qualifier, what I'm not sure of is what's 2 and what's 3. So it could be Thick as a Brick is definitely 5 on the worst to best. Selling England is definitely 4. Close to the Edge is definitely 1. You could switch the 2 and 3 spot with Wish You Were Here and Court of the Crimson King, and I would be comfortable with either one. So that's mine.
Cool. All right, so the definitive list here is.
All right, now the official list.
It's gonna be the most controversial by far too. That's the part.
Yeah, Close to the Edge is number 5. No, number 5. Number 5, I would say Selling England for me. Just because it's the one I have the least familiarity with. For God,
you mean
yes.
For God?
Yes. God's not as familiar with Genesis. Yeah. It's hard to say.
He wrote that fucking book.
God had nothing to do with Genesis, so I'm going to say.
That's his first book. That's his debut.
No, I must have forgot. This one's tough. So
just spout it out, motherfucker. Give the clarifications
so
I want to
at the
go
end.
to sleep, and I don't want to see either of your all's faces anymore.
I'm gonna say
it again.
All right. Selling England, Wish You Were Here at 4, Court of the Kingdom, Crimson King at 3, Thick as a Brick
You're
at 2.
talking too fast. I can't even follow you. Say it again.
Close to the edge.
Let's hear it again.
Not as
I couldn't
controversial
really
as I
follow
expected.
you. Say it again.
Am I dancing for you, or are you being serious?
You gotta be. You have to be confident. You weren't confident in your recital of the list.
So I'm just dancing for you. I see. All right.
No.
Maybe it's the bandana. Try taking off the bandana.
Okay. 5 is Selling England. 4 is Wish You Were Here. 3 is In the Court. 2 is Thick as a Brick. 1 is Close to the Edge.
Okay.
With the caveat that Wish You Were Here could flip with Court for 3, and Thick as a Brick is really close behind Close to the Edge, but I think Close to the Edge is probably my favorite of the 5. If we were talking about Dark Side of the Moon, Dark Side would be number 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an important clarifier.
Yeah, I love Dark Side of the Moon. That might be my favorite piece of music ever.
Yeah, I also want Dark Side of the Moon to be the number 1 Pink Floyd album on this list. But
that's a musical experience like no other I've ever had.
One more thing here before we sign off. I do think it'd be fun if each of us gave added an honorable mention to this list. So if you had to include one more album to sort of round off the top 5, what would it be? And we don't have to go into much depth about each one of them. I just think it'd be fun to add on here.
Well,
I know for me, it's Peru Namiko by
good
PFM.
choice. Mine would be Welcome Back, My Friends by ELP. And if a live album doesn't count, it would be the self-titled from ELP.
Yeah. Mine would be
but
Death Magnetic
I think
by
that
Metallica.
a live album. You got it exactly right again.
I mean, it's actually
mine would be God Hates Us All by
Slayer.
Slayer.
It's actually Lulu.
Right.
What about The Road Home by Nickelback?
Great. I know you're a big Nick.
Do we have to have this conversation again?
Fan, but,
why don't we move on?
Yeah.
No, my honorable mention is, I mean, arbitrarily pick an album from Gentle Giant before 76, but Octopus probably.
Good one. Real good one.
Yeah.
Wait, so hold on. I have to have an official pick. So am I allowed to pick a live album? Because that's the magnum opus of ELP. So that's what I'd pick.
Welcome Back, My Friends.
So am I allowed to pick that?
I don't really see why not.
And that's it. That's the most essential ELP album. So, yeah.
It is. It really is amazing. Like the way they speed up every track, just like it's like riding in a car when someone.
Oh, Hoedown!
You're like gripping the fucking.
They don't even double
door.
the tempo of Hoedown. I think that they might even triple the tempo. Keith Emerson is doing things that are inhuman on that record, and the fact that it's live, like, I don't know what that guy had, but that's
amazing.
That dude could just shred on the keyboards.
Pour one out for
and
the
Aqua, the Aqua Tarkus, the outro of Tarkus on there, which is like literally it's a 10-minute outro. Like it's like almost half the track is the outro. And Carl Palmer doing that, like, I don't know if you remember this. I don't know the last time you listened to Welcome Back, My Friends. Carl Palmer doing that like tribal beat that just does not stop. Like Carl Palmer is like just slamming that rhythm for 10 goddamn minutes. Like I don't know how that dude did that. and the fact that it's live.
Carl Palmer does not fuck
Fucking
around, dude. At any point in the
absolute
entire ELP discography,
goddamn
he's an
animal.
animal. Yeah,
Yeah.
he does not fuck around.
Love that shit.
Oh, me too. Yeah, Perinomico is an album I sort of
Excellent
rediscovered like, I don't know, 6 months ago. I was making pasta from scratch because I got a pasta roller for Christmas,
Adam Ragusea style.
and I was like, well, I'm making pasta. I obviously have to listen to something Italian, and I went for PFM Perinomico and forgot how much it holds up relative to those other top 5 records. I mean, this is a seminal moment in progressive rock, and it's so interesting because it's sort of removed from everything else because of the geography. Because
the Italian scene is its own.
Banco, yeah.
The Italian scene is an enormous rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good one to pick.
I fell asleep, not in a bad way, but fell asleep to Perinomico one time. I had the coolest fucking dreams. That's a cool album to fall asleep to.
Real soothing record.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah.
Yes.
Except for the outro on
yes.
Geronimo.
It's a little jarring. Yeah.
It's a
Oh
bit-
yeah, definitely
but
some like
That's how I
driving moments on the album.
Yeah, that's how I feel about Coffins and Io by Ko Dot. I know it's a whole other thing, but that album's very calm except for certain parts where it's kind of rough to listen to at times. Wake you up.
Interesting.
All right, well, just to cap this thing off, so this is the sort of the prologue to a longer series we want to embark on here, where we'll be giving a starter pack really for each subgenre of prog, according to the Prog Archives lists, probably. So stay tuned for more.